My husband slid the divorce papers across the kitchen island and set them down right on top of the payroll I was running for the company I built before I ever met him. Then told me he'd still be needing his $4,000 on the first, plus half the business, same as we'd always agreed. We had never agreed to any of it. He'd made 1 cup of coffee that morning. That's the detail I keep coming back to. 14 years, and every single morning I made 2. His with oat milk, mine black. And that morning there was 1 mug on the counter, warm, his, and no second one. I noticed it at 6 and told myself he was being kind, letting me sleep in. He wasn't being kind. He was practicing. He was already living in the house where I made my own coffee. I just hadn't been told yet. The papers came at 8. I was at the island with my laptop open, running payroll, because it was the last Friday of the pay period and 41 people were counting on the direct deposit hitting Monday. He walked in, set a folder down on top of my laptop like he was handing me a menu, and said, "I've thought about this a long time. I need you to be an adult about it." The folder wasn't a plain folder. It was one of mine. Bright water blue, my company's logo embossed in the corner, from the box of branded folders in my home office. He had walked into my office, taken a folder with my company's name on it, and used it to carry the papers that were going to try to take my company. I keep coming back to that too. He didn't even notice he'd done it. And there was a third thing, which I only understood later that day, a calendar invite. He'd sent it to me 2 days before, titled Family Logistics, 8 a.m. Friday, and I'd accepted it without reading it. The way you accept every invite from your husband of 14 years. And I thought it was about Theo's school pickup. It was this. He had scheduled the end of our marriage as a recurring style event, and I had clicked yes. The 1 cup of coffee, the calendar invite, and the folder with my own logo on it. I'm going to keep those 3 in front of you the whole way through, because those 3 things are the entire marriage in miniature, and I didn't understand a single one of them until the day it was already over. I need you to understand them, so understand them slowly. My name is Della. I was 44. My husband was Desmond, 46. We'd been married 14 years, together 15. I ran a commercial cleaning company that I started when I was 24, with a used cargo van I bought for $1,100 and a mop I still have, hanging in the warehouse, because I'm sentimental about exactly one object. By the year he slid that folder across the island, the company employed 41 people and cleaned medical offices, 2 surgical centers, and a stretch of corporate buildings off the interstate. It cleared, in a good year, a little over $1.5 million in revenue. My name was on the formation papers. My name was on the loan I signed at 26. Alone, terrified, in a bank that almost said no. My name was on all of it, and only my name, because there was no one else when I started, and the person who showed up later never picked up a mop in his life. Desmond had a job when we met. He managed a music store, and he was good with people. Genuinely good. The kind of warm that makes a room decide it likes you. I loved that about him. 3 years into the marriage, he came home on a Tuesday and told me he'd given his notice. Not asked, told. He said the store was killing his creativity. He said he needed to build something of his own. I said, okay. That was the first okay. There were a lot of okays. I want to own every one of them before I tell you the rest, because this is not a story about a villain and a saint. I paid for the road he strolled down for 11 years. I just told myself I was building us a driveway. So he set out to build something of his own. What he built was a series of beginnings. He built a recording studio in our garage, $22,000 in equipment, a treated ceiling, a booth, and I can count on one hand the finished songs that came out of it. He built a podcast about entrepreneurship that ran 9 episodes. He built a sneaker resale operation that lived as 30 pairs of shoes in our second bedroom for 2 years and sold, as far as I could ever tell, 4. He built a personal brand, which meant a photographer came to the house twice a year and I paid her. And I said okay to all of it. Okay to the truck, $52,000, because a founder can't show up to meetings in a Corolla. Okay to the co-working membership he used the way I use a gym, which is to say he had one. Okay to the business trips that were festivals, because networking, he said, happens where the energy is. Okay. I thought that was what a partner did. I thought love was how much weight you could carry without setting it down, and how much you could carry without ever once saying it was heavy. My mother carried my father like that, and he was good to her, and I decided that was the exchange rate. You carry, they love you back. I held up my end. I never once checked the other end. That's on me. I'll say it as many times as it takes. Here's the part that reads like a knife now. 6 years in, our son Theo was born 9 weeks early, 2 pounds, 11 ounces. He spent 11 weeks in the NICU, and I want you to sit in that number the way I had to. 11 weeks. I badged into that hospital every single morning at 6. I sat in a plastic chair beside a plastic box, and I ran my entire company from that chair, because 40 people don't stop needing paychecks because your son is fighting for his life 2 floors up. I signed payroll from the hospital cafeteria. I emailed clients with one hand while the other was through a porthole in an incubator. And Desmond came twice, in 11 weeks. The first week and once more near the end. In the middle of it, during the worst of it, he was at a 4-day festival in another state. And I know it was 4 days because I paid the card. He told me when he got back that he needed to protect his mental health, that hospitals made his anxiety spike, and that one of us had to keep the lights on out here. I was the one keeping the lights on from inside the hospital. I told myself we all cope differently. I told myself he loved Theo in his own way. I made excuses for a grown man the way you'd make excuses for a child. And I was so fluent in it that I believed myself. That was the warning. I filed it as a mood. I have to tell you about the folders, the other folders. The boring ones, because they're the whole ending. I keep records the way some people pray. There's a fireproof cabinet in my office with every formation document, every tax return, every loan paper, every rebrand, all of it, labeled by year in my own handwriting. When I started, the business was a sole proprietorship called Della's Cleaning. In 2017, I formed the LLC and renamed everything Brightwater Facility Services. In 2018, I paid a designer $400 for the logo, the one embossed on the folder he served me with. I have the designer's invoice. I have the state registration for the LLC. I have the exact date the name Brightwater first legally existed, which is a date, singular, that you cannot move. Hold on to that. I'll come back for it. it, and when I do, it's going to matter more than anything else in this story. That morning, I told him I needed to read the papers before I signed anything. He shrugged, took his 1 cup of coffee to the couch, and turned on the TV. He left the folder on the island and my payroll underneath it, and I lifted the papers off my laptop and finished the run, because the deposits had to clear. 41 people got paid on time that Monday. I made sure of it while my marriage sat next to my elbow in a folder with my own logo on it. Old habit, I keep the lights on. That's the one thing I've always been able to do. That night I called Hollis. Hollis has run a landscaping company for 30 years, and he's the closest thing I have to an older brother. He came up the same way I did, out of a truck. And about a decade ago, a man he'd trusted tried to claim he was a secret co-owner and walk off with half. It got ugly and it nearly ended him. If anyone was going to understand, it was Hollis. I told him everything. The folder, the 4,000, half the business, the calendar invite, the 1 cup of coffee. Hollis was quiet for a while. Then he asked me one question, and it was the right one. Della, whose name is on the company? The formation. Is it yours? Is it clean? Is it from before him? I told him it was mine. Only mine. From before I ever met Desmond. He let out a long breath. Then here's what I need to know, he said. Do you have the records? Every year, every document, the whole chain? And I laughed, because it was the only funny thing that had happened all day. Hollis, I said, I have a fireproof cabinet. He said, then call a business side family lawyer in the morning. And until you do, you don't sign anything, and you don't argue with him, and you don't explain yourself. Promise me. I promised. I didn't sleep. I lay next to a man who slept like a stone, and I ran a number in the dark that I'd spent years refusing to run. I'll get to it. It's worse than it sounds. The lawyer's name was Beatrice Lund. She'd done family and business dissolution for 28 years, and she had the stillness of someone who has already read the last page of the book you're panicking about. I brought 2 banker's boxes into her office and set them on her table, and she went through them the way a surgeon reads a scan, slow, unbothered, occasionally writing a single word. When she finished, she folded her hands. Tell me what he's asking for, she said. I told her. 4,000 a month, ongoing, half the company. He says he's a co-founder. He says he built it with me. Beatrice didn't blink. Did he found it with you? No, I started it 4 years before I met him. I have the formation documents. It was a sole proprietorship first, and I formed the LLC in 2017. Does he have an ownership stake on any document? Is his name anywhere? Nowhere. Not on the formation, not on the loan, not on the accounts. Did he work in the business? A salary? A title? A role? No, he had his own things. She underlined the word she'd just written. Does he work now? Not really, he has ventures. A California court, she said, is not going to hand half of a premarital, separately titled, separately funded business to a spouse whose name appears on none of it, who never drew a salary from it, and who has a documented independent earning history he chose not to use. Not on a claim, not on a feeling. He would need proof of a genuine ownership interest, and proof is a thing that either exists or does not. She tapped the formation papers. This is separate property with a clean chain of title. As long as these records hold, and they will, it was never his. It was never even close to his. Something unlocked in my chest. It was the first full breath I'd taken in 2 days. So what do? You give him exactly what he asked for, Beatrice said. A divorce. And nothing else that he assumed came stapled to it. We file a response that reflects reality. You don't sign his version. You sign nothing he hands you. You let me carry it. So that's what I did. I want to be precise because precision is the whole point of me. I gave Desmond a divorce, fully, without a fight because I wanted out at least as badly as he claimed to. What I did not give him was $4,000 a month. I did not give him half of a company his name was never on. I did not give him a founder's title he invented on a couch. I signed a divorce. I gave him exactly that, and not one thing more. Beatrice filed our response 12 days later. When it reached Desmond, he called me. It was a Sunday. Theo was at a birthday party. I had coffee, 2 cups I noticed, and drank both, and I almost let it ring out. I wish I had. You blindsided me, he said. No hello. The man who scheduled our divorce as a calendar invite told me I'd blindsided him. My version had the support, he said. The equity. This is nothing. You're trying to erase 14 years and leave me with nothing. You asked for a divorce, I said. You're getting a divorce. You know that's not what I meant. You never asked for those terms, I said. You assumed them, out loud, in my kitchen. There's a difference and you're going to learn it. 14 years entitles me to something, Della. It entitles you to a divorce. You have one. This isn't finished. My lawyer has everything else, I said. Don't call me about it again. And I hung up, and I noticed my hand wasn't shaking. And that surprised me more than anything he'd said. That's when Desmond went to work. Not at a job, on a story. He called everyone. His mother, Lorna, his friend Cyrus, who was at every barbecue I'd ever paid for, mutual friends, some neighbors, a couple of my own vendors, which took a special kind of nerve. And the story was clean, and it was cruel, and it was built to travel. Della chose the company over her family. Della is cold, she's a machine, she works 90 hours a week and has ice where the warmth should be. Desmond gave up his dreams to support hers, and now that she's successful, she's cutting him loose with nothing. Poor Desmond, who believed in her before anyone did. The text started within the week. Not one of them asked how I was. They asked how I could do this to him after everything he gave up. One, from a woman whose kid rode the same bus as Theo, asked if it was true I was throwing away the man who'd stood by me through the NICU. I read that one standing in my warehouse, next to the $1,100 van, and I actually had to sit down on the bumper. The man who stood by me through the NICU came twice in 11 weeks, and spent 4 days of it at a festival I paid for. But that's the thing about a story. It doesn't have to be true. It just has to be told first, and told warm. Then Lorna called, Desmond's mother. I'd loved her, I thought, and I thought she'd loved me. He's devastated, Della, she said. He can barely function. You're throwing away a man who gave you everything. What did he give me, Lorna? I'd honestly like one example. Specific. A pause. Belief, she said. He believed in you. I have 41 employees who show up and believe in the payroll, I said. The payroll never once went to a festival while our son was in an incubator. She hung up on me. Then Cyrus called, the one at every barbecue. You're making a huge mistake, he said. You know Desmond has options. Women would line up for a guy like him. He said it like a threat, like the thought of some other woman inheriting my husband was supposed to scare me into a settlement. I hope they line up, I said. I truly do. I hope one of them has a great job because he runs about $70,000 a year and produces nothing, and the studio needs new monitors. Cyrus hung up too. They all hung up eventually. It became a reflex with them. After that, I finally ran the number. I went out to the warehouse one night after everyone left, sat on the bumper of the van with a legal pad, and added up what I'd actually spent building the man instead of the business. The studio, $22,000. The truck, $52,000. The podcast gear, the brand shoots, the co-working, the festivals, the inventory, the co-signed card I quietly paid down twice. The years he drew nothing and cost everything. 14 years of a household where I was the only faucet. When I finished, the number at the bottom of the page was a little over $610,000. $610,000. I'd handed more than $500,000 to a man who was now telling a bus stop mom that he stood by me through the worst thing that ever happened to my family, the thing he skipped. I sat with that number on the bumper for a long time. I didn't cry. I was somewhere past it. I just held it. The way you hold a stone you're deciding whether to keep, learning its exact weight, so I'd never be able to pretend I didn't know. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in February. Beatrice told me it would likely be short, because the law was clear and my records were clean and his claim was a feeling in a nice suit. She told me to wear something plain, keep my face still, and say nothing unless she or the judge spoke to me directly. There is nothing here for them to stand on, she said. She was right about almost all of it. She was wrong about short. We walked into the courthouse and Desmond was already there with his attorney, a young man in a suit that cost more than his argument, the kind of lawyer who seems to bill by the syllable. Lorna sat behind Desmond. Cyrus sat next to Lorna. He'd brought an audience. It started ordinary. Beatrice laid out the chain of title, the premarital formation, the sole proprietorship, the LLC, the separate funding, the fact that Desmond's name appeared on precisely zero of it. She was calm and exact, and the judge, a sharp, unhurried woman named Ibarra, moved things along. Then Desmond's attorney stood up to make the case for equity, and he said a sentence I had never once heard in 15 years. He said that my husband had been a co-founder of the company from the very beginning, an equal architect of its early operations, and that there was documentation to prove it. He said that during a critical 11-week period, while I was, in his words, understandably distracted by a family medical crisis, Desmond had single-handedly kept the company operational, and that this was the foundation of his equitable claim. And then he slid a folder forward, a folder of his own. I felt the floor go out from under the table. 11 weeks. He was going to use the 11 weeks. I leaned to Beatrice and whispered, he wasn't there. He wasn't there for any of it. He was at a festival. He came twice. Beatrice lifted one finger off the table. Wait. She asked to see the documentation, and the judge ordered it produced, and Desmond's attorney handed over a folder, and Beatrice read it page by page at our table, slowly, and I watched her face, and her face did not move at all, which I would learn was the single most dangerous thing that face could do. Here is what was in the folder. A founder's agreement dated to the early years, naming Desmond as a 50% co-founder, with a paragraph about his capital contribution and his operational leadership, and a second page, a kind of memo, describing how he had run the company during the 11-week period while I was at the hospital. It was that second page, and the letterhead on the first, that ended him, because he overreached, because he couldn't resist making himself the hero of the exact 11 weeks he'd fled. That's where the whole thing came apart, by his own hand, and I got to watch it happen. Beatrice asked the court for a short recess to review the documents. Ibarra granted 15 minutes. In the hallway, Beatrice took out her phone, pulled something up, and turned to me with the closest thing to a smile I ever saw on her. Della, this founder's agreement is dated to your early years in business, but look at the top of it. I looked. It was on Brightwater letterhead, the blue, the logo, my logo. The name Brightwater Facility Services, Beatrice said. When did that legally exist? 2017, I said. The LLC, I have the state registration. And the logo? 2018, I have the designer's invoice, $400. She nodded slowly. He wrote a founding document, dated to a year when the company was a sole proprietorship called Della's Cleaning, and he put a name on it that didn't exist for 6 more years and a logo that didn't exist for 7. He built his proof out of a company that hadn't been named yet. She let that sit. And the 11 weeks. He says he ran operations. You badged into that hospital every day? Every day. 6 a.m. I have the parent access logs. I have the emails I sent from there. I signed payroll from the cafeteria. And I have the credit card statements that put him in another state for 4 days of it. She almost laughed quietly, the way a person laughs at the sheer nerve of the universe. He built his metal, she said, out of the worst weeks of your life, in a building he refused to enter, using a company name that hadn't been invented yet. He assumed you couldn't prove where you were because he never once thought about where you were. But you keep everything. And I understood, standing in that hallway, exactly what he had done. He needed a version of those 11 weeks where he was the one keeping the lights on and I was too broken to notice. But I wasn't too broken. I was in a plastic chair running a company with my son's monitors beeping behind me, and I had the logs to prove every hour of it. And so did the hospital, and so did my bank. The alibi he built to make himself a founder ran straight through the 11 worst weeks of my life, the one stretch he couldn't be bothered to show up for, and he turned it into his finest hour, on paper, in writing, under a name that didn't exist. We went back in. Beatrice stood and requested that both documents be authenticated. She noted evenly for the record that the founder's agreement bore a company name first registered with the state in 2017, and a logo first invoiced in 2018, and that this presented what she called a chronological impossibility for a document dated to the company's founding. She noted that the operational memo described a period during which the respondent's own bank and hospital records placed her present and working, and the petitioner, her financial records she was prepared to enter, out of state. Then she said the quiet thing that ends careers. She asked that the court consider whether a document constructed from an entity name that postdated its own claimed date could be anything other than recently fabricated. The room went very still. Desmond's attorney asked for a moment with his client. I watched them whisper. I watched Desmond's face slide from wounded founder to something flat and cornered. I watched Lorna lean forward, confused, and I watched her son not turn around to explain himself to his mother. And that was the moment Lorna started to understand. Not from me, not from anyone, but from her own boy's silence. Then Judge Ibarra looked directly at Desmond. Sir, I'm going to ask you one simple question, and I want you to think before you answer, because you're under oath. When did you and Ms. Marsh found this company together? Desmond opened his mouth. He looked at the folder. He looked at his lawyer. In the early years, he said. The beginning. The document in front of you has a date on it, Ibarra said, and a company name. When was the company called Brightwater? A pause. Long. The kind of pause that has a floor and a bottom. I'd have to check, he said. The name on this founding document, Ibarra said, was registered with the state 6 years after the date on the document. Counsel, I will need this authenticated before I consider it for any purpose whatsoever, and you will want to advise your client, carefully, on the seriousness of submitting fabricated evidence to this court. That was the confrontation in the end. The judge did most of it for me, but I had one thing to say, and Beatrice let me say it, because I told her in the hallway that I needed it, once. On the record, in front of the people he'd recruited to hate me. When Ibarra asked if the respondent wished to add anything before the recess, I stood. Just one thing. My voice came out steadier than I'd earned. Desmond, the 11 weeks you say you saved this company, our son was in the NICU. 2 pounds, 11 ounces. I badged in at 6 every morning, and I ran payroll from a plastic chair with my hand through the wall of an incubator. You came twice. You spent 4 days of it at a festival I paid for. And now you've printed a medal for those weeks. On my letterhead, under a name I hadn't invented yet, and you've handed it to a judge. Desmond stared at the table. You didn't just leave, I said. You needed the worst thing that ever happened to me to be a story about you. That's the part I can't forgive. And it's the part that's going to lose you this. I signed your divorce. That's the only true thing I ever handed you. Everything else, you're going to have to build yourself. For the first time in your life. I sat down. Lorna was crying, and I could tell exactly what kind of crying it was. It wasn't for Desmond. It was the crying of a mother who has just watched her son, under oath, and understood for the first time who she'd spent a month defending. Ibarra took the recess. When we came back, Desmond's attorney withdrew the equity claim in full. There was no other move. Authentication would have buried them, and worse. The judge struck the document from consideration and turned to the property and support. And from there, it went exactly the way Beatrice had said it would on the very first afternoon. The company was mine. Separate property. Premarital. Clean. His name nowhere on any page of it, because it had never been anywhere. No half, no co-founder. The judge denied ongoing spousal support outright, citing his age, his health, his earning history, and his voluntary and sustained choice not to use it. She granted 4 months of transitional support at a fraction of what he demanded, $1,100 a month, which Beatrice told me later was the judge being disciplined about the fabricated folder she clearly hadn't forgotten. 15 years, dissolved in a courtroom in under 2 hours. The whole thing folding the instant his own document was asked to name the date. The part nobody warns you about is that the court was the easy part. The court has rules. People don't. The story he'd spread didn't evaporate when he lost, because some of the people who'd repeated it doubled down, since admitting they'd been fooled felt worse than being wrong forever. A layer of my social life peeled off and left, and I realized most of it had been his anyway, and I'd only been paying the cover charge. Cyrus reached out 2 months later with a long message that opened apologetic and turned 3 paragraphs into the real reason. Desmond was behind on the studio lease he'd kept, and Cyrus had co-signed. And would I do the decent thing and help, given everything Desmond had been through? Everything Desmond had been through. I read it twice to be sure I understood. He'd built a fake founding document out of my son's hospital stay, lost in open court, and now his friend wanted me to cover the studio. I wrote back 2 sentences. Desmond is healthy, capable, and 46 years old. I wish him well from a great distance. I never heard from Cyrus again. Lorna called a week after it was final. I almost didn't pick up. When I did, she was quiet a long moment, and then she said, I owe you an apology, Della. I didn't know about the folder. I didn't know about the festival. I called you cold to your face and my son let me. She paused. I knew he could be lazy. I didn't know he could do that to the 11 weeks. I told her it was okay, which wasn't quite true, but it was the kind thing. It isn't okay, she said, but thank you. She still calls every so often. She asks about Theo, who is 9 now and healthy and loud. I think we're both grieving a version of Desmond who never actually existed. Hers a son, mine a partner. And it turns out that's enough to build a strange, real, small kind of family on. It's more than the marriage ever was. Here's the thing I keep coming back to, underneath all of it. I thought being a good partner meant being the only faucet, and never once mentioning that I was tired. I thought love was the weight you could carry in silence, and the more you carried without a sound, the more it counted. And there's a kind of person who finds someone built like that, someone who will keep the lights on without ever asking why she's the only one paying the bill, and they don't fall in love with her. They move their whole unlived life onto her back and call it a marriage, and the cruelest part is she'll thank them for the trust. I did. For 14 years, I thanked him with $4,000 a month and a studio and a truck and every okay I had. He slid a folder across my island, my folder, my logo, on top of the payroll for the people who actually show up, and he told me he'd still be needing his $4,000 and half of everything, same as we'd always agreed. He was right that I'd been paying without question for a decade. He was wrong that I always would. He wanted half of a company his name was never on. What he got in the end was an accurate accounting. His name placed exactly where it had always been, which is nowhere. And the accounting is the one honest thing I ever handed him. He wanted $4,000 a month. What he got was the truth. Itemized. No charge. And the truth is the only bill from that marriage I will never regret paying.